All right, we discussed briefly earlier about ISO, and I looked it up for you guys, and I want you guys to kind of know the history of these things and know what these terms mean, so that as you're saying them, it makes more sense to you, right? So ISO stands for the International Organization for Standardization. I'm guessing it's like French or something, where it's like International Standardization Organization. I don't know why it's IOS, but they say ISO. But ISO is from the standardization board, right, or organization, and they create standards for all kinds of things, and light sensitivity is one of the things that they've sort of standardized, and it began with film, and that film sensitivity has gone over to sensor sensitivity. So in our terms, in photographic and filmmaking standards, we'll just refer to ISO. And when we're talking about ISO, we're talking about the sensitivity of the sensor. Again, it's this, each number that we're going to discuss now is a doubling of light sensitivity that is represented by the doubling of the numerical value. Here, let's just kind of go through these ISOs, all right? So there's ISO 25, 50, 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, 12800, 25600, 51200, 100, 2400, 200, 4800, and 409600. All of those represents a double in light sensitivity. And again, this is something I highly recommend that you memorize these, because when you adjust one, then you can adjust the others correspondingly. So for example, if we want to shoot at f2.8 because we want that desired effect of the type of depth of field, and we have to shoot at 1/50th of a second for the shutter speed, then you can move your ISO around as that third variable to give you the proper exposure. Does that make sense? And if you know that it looked okay at f4, and it was f4 at 1/50th at 400 ISO, and we want to go to 2.8, then you just lower the ISO to 200, right? Like I can do that in my head. And so you guys should do that too. It's not that hard. If I can do it, you guys can totally do it too. So one question that may come up is, Jeff, there's these other numbers on the Canon cameras, for example, like 160 ISO, 320, 640. What those represent are either like 1/3 or 2/3 stop increments from actual full stops of light sensitivity. Does that make sense? So between 200 and 400, there's going to be a ISO of 320 on some cameras. And that represents, I believe that's, maybe it's like 2/3 of a stop, or maybe it's a half stop actually. It's a half stop in between, I think. It's a third? It's a third stop difference. So keep that in mind. One thing I want to kind of mention though, on the Canon cameras, when shooting video, this is kind of a little bit more intermediate advanced idea, but the Canon camera native ISOs, at least on the Mark II, the Canon 5D Mark II, the Canon 5D Mark III, and I believe the 7D, the native ISOs are on those 160s. So the 160, 320, 640, 1280, 1600, and so on. If it's like divisible by, like in a round number, by 160 or multiples of 160, that's going to give you a cleaner ISO, a cleaner image. So if you don't understand, don't worry. You can either hit me up in the comments or it's more intermediate advanced. One thing to kind of note, even though your camera may be able to go to 6400 ISO, 12,000 ISO, 25,000 ISO, and so on, there's a sacrifice that's being made, and not all cameras are created equal. What happens is, typically, the higher in the ISO that you go, the noisier the image gets. So we will do an example with this camera here. This camera right now is set to 1/100th of a second for shutter speed, f16 for the aperture, and ISO 100. And as I increase the ISO to 200, 400, you can start to see the image, 800, but you'll notice the image on this camera starts to get noisy at ISO 800, 1600, 3200, and by noisy, it's that grain pattern that you see, and then 6400. That's the, oh, and then we also have 12,800. So this is just like a very, still image, but if you look closely, you'll see like in the chair in the shadow on the lip there that the it's kind of this like this noise pattern. So that's kind of ISO. That's what ISO means. It's the sensitivity of the sensor. So if you have any questions, hit us up in the comments and we will try and help you guys out. I'm Jeff Orig with Orig Media. Thanks.